You find yourself back in the quiet garden where your journey began. The trees sway gently in the evening breeze, their leaves whispering like old men trading stories. You sit once more on the stone bench, feeling the warmth fade from the air. Looking back, the beard ban was never just a quirky papal footnote. It was a mirror, reflecting how personal choices ripple outward, touching politics, art, gender, and identity. It showed how even the most peculiar decrees can reveal the deeper workings of power and the profoundly human responses that follow, from barbers sharpening their razors with extra flair, to women keeping tiny, handmade beards as tokens, to poets lamenting the loss of whiskered wisdom. This was a moment when something small became something strange. And then something strangely meaningful. You think again of the whispered prayers, the scraping blades, the paintings and poems. You remember the monks, the saints, the rebels in the salons of Paris. All of it flowing together like a, "Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the flickering world of 17th century Rome, a place where sandalwood smoke curls through narrow stone streets, marble saints stare blankly from fountains, and candlelight dances across the polished helmets of palace guards. It's a city that smells faintly of incense and old books, and tonight, you've just stepped into it wearing a doublet that's slightly too tight and boots that squeak with every cautious step. You pass a barber's stall still open after sundown. A man leans back in a carved chair, white cloth tucked into his collar like a surrender flag, as the barber scrapes a straight razor over his chin with ritual precision. A tiny bell chimes with each swish of the blade. You glance at your reflection in a window. Should you shave, too? Or rebel, quietly, facially? But you probably wouldn't survive this era. Not just because you don't speak Latin or know how to curtsy properly to a bishop. But because here, facial hair has consequences. In fact, it might be banned. And not just socially frowned upon, but actually papally outlawed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from a place far from Rome, I'd love to know your location and local time down in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly uphill toward the Vatican walls, your breath mixing with the misty Roman night. The streets here seem quiet, but they're thick with history. Each brick underfoot has heard whispers of scandal, ambition, and very specific grooming preferences. It's the early 1600s. The Renaissance has bloomed and faded, and Rome is now in full Baroque mode. Churches don't just sparkle, they practically pose. Marble is everywhere. Gold leaf might as well be legal tender. Every chapel wants to be your favorite. And while grandeur soars skyward in architectural form, the rules of everyday life seem to inch ever closer to the absurd. Even walking past a market stall, you notice something odd, not a single beard in sight. Gentlemen wear ruffled collars, ladies wear veils, but every man is clean-shaven. Priests, merchants, even the statue of a Roman general near the fountain has mysteriously smooth cheeks, as if someone took a chisel to his chin, but this wasn't always the case. Beards had once signified wisdom, masculinity, even holiness. Remember those dramatic oil paintings of apostles with cascading, wind-blown beards? Michelangelo's Moses? That guy could probably bench press a basilica. But now, in the Rome of Pope Urban VIII, a beard might mark you as suspicious. You reach the edge of St. Peter's Square, still under construction. The obelisk towers like a petrified candle, watching the workmen pack up for the night. There's scaffolding everywhere, and you catch the scent of fresh lime mortar. Even the basilica itself seems to hum softly under the moonlight. Somewhere inside, a conversation might be taking place, cardinals debating the aesthetics of stained glass, or perhaps someone whispering about the dangers of fashion. You know, that beard that bishop from Florence refuses to shave. It's said he trims it into a subtle V-shape. Very subversive. There's a term you overhear often, decoro. It means decorum, but also dignity, appropriateness, visual harmony. Urban VIII is said to care about decoro more than dogma. He wants order, symmetry. And to his eye, the untamed beard screams rebellion, or at least bad taste. Some historians argue whether the beard ban was ever formally codified into law. No surviving document spells it out with legal clarity. But social pressure, now that's another matter. Papal courtiers began showing up to public events barefaced. Clergy were encouraged to keep a neat chin. A few unlucky friars were reassigned to distant provinces after refusing grooming guidance. Coincidence? Probably not, and then there's the marble. Urban VIII commissions countless statues and insists on a clean, classical aesthetic. Michelangelo's raw, roaring muscularity gives way to smoother lines, idealized forms. Even the saints look like they've had a careful facial. It's as if divine authority now requires a daily shave. You sit on a cool stone bench beneath a lantern and watch a cat slink past, unimpressed by papal policy. The night air has that gentle, chalky taste of ancient buildings. And even though nothing's officially happening, you sense the weight of rules, written and unwritten, settling on your shoulders like incense smoke. A man walks by in clerical robes, chin gleaming with the effort of fresh shaving. He nods politely. You nod back. It's like a secret handshake. You've passed the first test. For now, of course, not everyone's thrilled about it. In the countryside, older priests still stroke their beards with thoughtful defiance. In Florence, artists quietly mock the trend by painting saints with suspicious 5 o'clock shadows. And in backrooms across Rome, people tell tales of Jesuits who grew beards in protest, only to mysteriously disappear from public view for reflection. But for you, tonight, there's no need to choose sides. You simply sit, breathe, and absorb the world as it was, powdered, perfumed, and oddly preoccupied with facial hair. A street musician plays a soft tune on a lute nearby. You notice his beard is wispy and hesitant, like he's trying to grow one in secret. It suits him. But you doubt he'll be playing in St. Peter's Square anytime soon, and above it all, the stars over Rome blink silently, unimpressed. After all, empires have risen and fallen over stranger things than a beard ban. You wake early, though wake is generous. It's more like you drift upward from a hazy half-sleep, nudged by the bells of some nearby convent that rings like it's trying to guilt you into morning mass. You stretch beneath rough linen sheets in a borrowed room above a bakery, where the air still smells faintly of yesterday's olive rolls. Outside, the city hums awake, but gently, like it knows not to jolt anyone too abruptly from dreams. You slip on your outer coat, smooth down your shirt, and glance at your reflection in the tarnished mirror. Still beardless. Good. You don't want trouble today. Especially not with the papal-style police. Now, to be fair, they're not officially called that. No tricorn hats or fashion tribunals, just a creeping network of expectations. Urban VIII never held a razor to anyone's throat, but his preferences echoed like thunder through the Vatican corridors, through seminaries, through the streets. The church had long regulated appearance. You already know about vestments, robes in deep greens, purples, gold. But underneath the fabric came subtler orders: neatness, modesty, uniformity. The church had a vested interest in appearing timeless. Not trendy. Not radical. And increasingly, not hairy, clothing was theology in stitches. Every robe, every cincture, said something. And when the clergy began standardizing their outward form, facial hair became a problem. A wild beard suggested pride. Or worse, individualism. Can't have that, so began the long tradition of regulating the body in service to the soul. Priests were expected to present themselves as vessels of divine order. Which, apparently, meant they needed to look like they could pose for a marble bust at any moment. There was even discussion among some bishops, according to fringe writings, about how a beard might distract from the sanctity of the Eucharist. Picture this, a priest lowering his chin during consecration, and, oh no, a rogue whisker tickles the rim of the chalice. Disastrous. This was not, of course, universally agreed upon. Historians still argue whether Urban's grooming ideals were about uniformity or vanity, or perhaps just his own artistic tastes. After all, he had a sculptor's eye, a patron's wallet, and a temperamental dislike for chaos. Smooth faces were clean canvases, but facial hair wasn't just an aesthetic, it was a symbol. Beards had long carried cultural weight. Ancient philosophers wore them as badges of wisdom. Eastern patriarchs still did. Even Jesus himself, well, you've seen the paintings, so to strip a man of his beard wasn't just to ask him to shave. It was to realign his identity, gently or not, and so, day by day, Rome's public spaces began to smooth out. A man with a beard at a papal audience might draw glances. Clergy from foreign lands were often reminded, politely but firmly, that local custom leaned toward the clean-shaven look. If they hesitated, they were guided. One poor bishop from Poland famously arrived with a snowy beard and left with something closer to an embarrassed mustache. You take a turn into a quieter street where tailors and cobblers are opening their shutters. A row of cassocks hangs outside one shop, fluttering like solemn flags. The cobbler next door yawns as he places a freshly polished pair of bishop's shoes in the window display. They gleam with terrifying virtue. A paperboy stumbles past you with a handful of newsletters, some political, some devotional. You catch a glimpse of a satirical cartoon. It's crudely drawn, but unmistakable, a pope wielding a razor like a sword, chasing a terrified monk. The caption reads something about cleansing the chin and the soul. You smile. Humor survives, even under the sternest regime, and here's a fun little tidbit: while Urban VIII preferred the clean-shaven aesthetic, his own portraits were never entirely consistent. Some artists gave him a slight shadow, a hint of stubble, almost out of artistic defiance. Others painted him so smooth he looked airbrushed centuries before Photoshop. One scholar once joked that Urban's beard came and went like theological clarity. You pause at a fountain where pigeons are already having their morning bath. You splash your face, watching the ripples distort your reflection. Could a papal decree really reach this far into daily life? Apparently, yes, but the enforcement wasn't harsh, it was social. If you wanted advancement, if you wanted papal favor, if you wanted to dine at the right tables or preach in the grand chapels, you kept your face tidy. Simple as that. Over time, the exception became the outlier. The beard became the joke, the relic, the risk. It's hard to imagine today, but in Baroque Rome, style was scripture. And the papacy? Well, it held the mirror. Back at the main square, a group of theology students pass you, whispering Latin phrases as they rehearse for some examination. One has the wisps of a goatee trying desperately to survive. You catch his eye. He looks away. Poor kid. He'll probably shave before the week is out, still, whispers persist. In some corners. Resistance stirs, not revolution, just chin-level disobedience. A Jesuit professor rumored to grow a beard each Lent as a meditative act. A bishop who only shaved on feast days, claiming it was to honor the smoothness of saints. The papal court never punished these things directly. But assignments were shuffled. Invitations rescinded. Funds redirected, and yet, the people adapt. They always do. Rome yawns, stretches, and adjusts its collar. The bells ring again, this time more cheerfully. You look around and realize the whole city seems to carry itself just a bit taller, chin up. Oh, you walk westward now, away from the Vatican's looming dome, toward the humbler edges of Rome, where the streets twist more casually, and the stone buildings wear their age without polish. Here, the beardless policy starts to fray a little. You pass a baker with a proud salt and pepper beard, flour dusted at the tips, slicing focaccia with the casual arrogance of a man too old, and too indispensable, to care what the Pope thinks. In places like this, rules soften. No one's shaving in alleyway kitchens or lecturing cobblers on ecclesiastical aesthetics. The barbers here are half gossip hub, half silent rebellion. One even keeps a painted sign of St. Peter above his door, St. Peter. Bearded as always, wielding his keys with an expression that seems to say, really, Urban? You duck into a tiny church, one of those oddly shaped ones that seems to have been added to over the centuries like a poorly planned collage. Candles flicker along the nave, and a few early worshippers kneel in the cool hush. You take a seat in the back pew and glance toward the altar. The priest is elderly, a whisper of a man with a voice like parchment rubbing against stone. And he, dear listener, has a beard. A careful one. Trimmed neatly, but undeniably there, silver, soft, almost luminous in the candlelight. A quiet protest. Or maybe just stubbornness. Historians still debate whether such priests were tolerated out of leniency or logistics. The countryside, after all, had fewer barbers. And aging clergy were rarely reassigned unless scandal erupted or theology went completely sideways. Beard or not, if you could quote Augustine and make it to Mass on time, you were probably safe. But back in Rome proper, the standards held. Courtiers and scholars kept their faces smoother than the silk linings of their cloaks. The Jesuit colleges, those breeding grounds for thought and discipline, enforced the trend most zealously. Some even wrote grooming etiquette into student handbooks, describing the chastity of the cheek and the virtue of visible skin. You take a moment to imagine that being part of your exam prep. Father, I've memorized Aquinas and Aquaviva. Also, I shaved with cold water using a mirror the size of a spoon. 10 points, yet not all resistance was quiet. In Venice, ever the theatrical sibling of Rome, one Carmelite monk named Lorenzo allegedly grew out a beard as a form of mystical detachment. He claimed each hair represented a sin the city had committed. A bit dramatic, perhaps, but that's Venice for you. Even stranger, a few underground pamphlets started circulating, tiny printed leaflets warning of the feminization of the clergy. These tracts, written under pseudonyms like Frater Adamo or Veritas Tonsor, accused Urban VIII's grooming preferences of weakening the Church's masculine virtues. Most were dismissed as fringe screeds. But the tension was there, whisker deep and growing. You leave the church and follow the curve of a shaded lane lined with lemon trees. A cat watches you from atop a wall, blinking slowly as if bored by your clean-shaven conformity. You offer a nod of apology. Further down, a group of young artists lounges on the steps of a broken fountain, sketching in the morning light. Their conversation flits from pigment to theology to dinner plans. One of them, tall, freckled, absent-minded, has a short beard. You hear him say, "It's for contrast. My face is a canvas, too." The others laugh, and no one seems particularly concerned. Artists always get away with more. That's something worth noting. While clergy were expected to embody spiritual and visual restraint, artists often leaned into eccentricity. And because the church depended so heavily on their talent, especially during the Counter-Reformation art boom, a few stray whiskers were usually forgiven, provided the commissions came out looking holy. Caravaggio, for example, notoriously flouted decorum, though by Urban VIII's time he was already dead, and frankly beyond the help of any barber. But his legacy lingered. Raw, dramatic, emotional. His saints looked like ex-convicts. His Madonnas looked tired. And yes, his apostles had beards. You stroll past a workshop that smells of oil paint and beeswax polish. Inside, a nearly finished painting of Saint Jerome dominates the room. The saint's beard cascades down like an avalanche of gray. You can tell, no papal decree reached this canvas. The artist catches you looking and shrugs. Scripture says wisdom flows from the mouth of the aged, he mutters. Seems to me, it needs somewhere to rest. Theology and aesthetics, always awkward bedfellows. You reach a small square where the local children are chasing each other around a broken column base. An older man sits nearby, carving a flute from olive wood. He sees you, raises an eyebrow, and says, "You a priest?" You shake your head. "Good," he says, "because that beard bans nonsense." Turns out, he remembers a time before Urban. Before the smooth-faced edict. When priests still had beards, and bishops occasionally looked like wandering philosophers. He even swears one pope, not naming names, used to comb his beard before delivering homilies. Made him look wise, the man says. Like he had wrestled thoughts before speaking. You sit for a while, just breathing in the gentle chaos of the city's outer rhythms. Here, the rules feel more like rumors. The air smells less of incense, more of sun-warmed stone and tomato vines. A few beards rustle in the breeze. You rise from the sun-warmed bench with a bit of effort, nothing like stone to make a person stiff, and wander back toward the more formal quarters of the city. You have an appointment of sorts, not a serious one, but curious, a visit to a scriptorium tucked inside an old Dominican residence. Word has it the monks there are compiling a treatise on ecclesiastical presentation, yes, including grooming habits. This promises to be either very enlightening or very, very dull. Either way, perfect. You pass through a narrow archway into a quiet courtyard. The air smells of lavender and parchment. A black-robed monk greets you with a nod and gestures silently toward the interior staircase. You follow him up to a long room, its walls lined with books, scrolls, and a few skulls, decorative, allegedly. At the far end, several monks are hunched over desks, quills scratching steadily like sleepy crickets. One monk, Brother Paolo, welcomes you with a smile that implies he's had too much tea and not enough conversation lately. He's youngish, pale, and looks suspiciously like he might enjoy writing footnotes more than full thoughts. Still, he launches into his topic with gusto. According to Paolo, grooming regulations for clergy had existed long before Urban VIII. Even in the early church, appearance was a topic of theological concern. Ambrose of Milan had once criticized bishops who spent more time on their hair than their homilies. Harsh. Jerome, naturally, was cranky about it too. He had opinions about everything, including whether priests should use perfume. Answer: definitely not. In medieval times, monks were often tonsured, hair shaved in that signature ring that suggested both humility and, let's be honest, chronic coldness. But the beard? That was often left alone. In fact, Eastern monastic orders preferred full beards as signs of ascetic withdrawal. The further east you went, the longer the beards got. In Armenia and Georgia. But Rome? Rome was always complicated. Brother Paolo points to a dusty volume. It's written in Latin so dense it might as well be porridge. Here, he says, this is from a council in the 12th century. It suggests that clerics should avoid vanity of hair. Which could mean anything. Or nothing. Historians still argue whether such vague phrases were about facial hair or fashionable mullets. Paolo suspects both. During the Renaissance, beards made a bit of a comeback, especially among scholars who wanted to look like Plato. A full beard could suggest wisdom, maturity, gravitas. But once the Counter-Reformation began, the pendulum swung. Simplicity, obedience, uniformity, these became the holy trinity of papal fashion. Urban VIII just took it to its logical, and literal, face. Of course, Paolo adds, eyes twinkling, there were exceptions. He tells you about one rather flamboyant bishop from Sicily who justified his beard by claiming it was an inheritance from Saint Joseph. Spiritual genetics, Paolo deadpans. The Vatican wasn't amused. There's also the case of the Portuguese delegation in the 1630s. Their lead cardinal arrived with a regal beard, trimmed like a royal curtain. The papal court gasped. Urban made a polite suggestion. The cardinal replied with equal politeness that Portugal had been bearded long before Rome had opinions. A compromise was reached. The beard stayed, but would be wrapped in gauze during major ceremonies. Yes, gauze. History is weird. The scriptorium air grows stiller as the afternoon light shifts. Dust dances in golden shafts across open pages. You start to feel sleepy yourself. Paolo is now talking about papal bulls, no, not the angry animals, the official decrees. He thinks one of Urban's lesser-known bulls might have included a veiled reference to clerical grooming. Something about the order of the visible vessel. No one knows exactly what it means, but Paolo thinks it might be code for shave, or else. Looking vaguely annoyed. This, he says proudly, is from a satire. See the little devil under the table? That's a metaphor. You're starting to suspect Paolo might be the only person who's read this particular satire in 200 years. You thank him, and he bows slightly, promising to send you copies of some particularly juicy footnotes. You tell him that would be delightful, and mean it mostly. Back in the sun, the world feels less dense. You realize how thoroughly a room of slow-speaking monks can warp time. You're not sure how long you were in there, an hour. A day. Possibly a minor liturgical season. As you wander back toward the heart of the city, your mind buzzes gently with odd facts, St. Ambrose's haircut judgments, Portuguese beard gauze, and that one bishop who looked like a curtain. It all starts to form a sleepy mosaic. The Church, for all its spiritual ambitions, has always wrestled with the human urge to decorate. Whether by robe, by ring, or by rogue whisker, the tension remains: adorn the temple, or strip it bare. The afternoon bells chime distantly. Somewhere, Paolo is probably writing a footnote about them. You find a quiet bench beneath a fig tree. A breeze stirs the leaves. And you lean back, eyes half closed, imagining the world of old Rome, its debates, its decrees, its very serious facial opinions. the beard ban wasn't really about hair. It never is. It was about control, image, ritual, and how power prefers its reflection tidy. You doze a little under that fig tree, the rustling leaves mixing with distant church bells in your half-dreaming brain, until the scent of roasted chestnuts pulls you gently back into the present. A cart vendor nearby is fanning a small charcoal flame, his cheeks ruddy and, yes, lightly stubbled. You smile. Another quiet protest. Back on your feet, you decide to head toward the archives housed beneath San Giovanni in Laterano, the cathedral of the Bishop of Rome. Not St. Peter's, no, that's where the Pope lives. But San Giovanni? That's technically his seat. And if you're going to dig into papal beard decrees, it's best to go where the paperwork lives. You approach the cathedral through a long avenue of cypress trees, where the shadows stretch in elegant stripes across the path. The entrance is flanked by marble saints, each looking mildly disappointed, as if you've arrived late and didn't bring enough theological reverence. Inside, the hush is immediate, like velvet over your ears. You're led down into the archives by an attendant who walks with all the enthusiasm of a man who's filed too many scrolls for one lifetime. The room smells of damp stone and beeswax, and somewhere, softly, Gregorian chant is playing on a phonograph. You can't tell if it's being used for ambience or as a spiritual deterrent against nosy guests. The attendant, whose name might be Antonio, or perhaps all attendants are called Antonio, pulls out a heavy leather-bound register and thuds it onto the table. Edictum Urbanus Octavus, he mutters. Urban VIII's decrees. You flip carefully through the pages. Latin phrases jump out, most of them dusty with formality. But eventually, you find it, tucked into a larger section about clerical decorum and visual harmony within the body ecclesiastica. There it is, a gentle but firm directive that clergy should present faces unmarred by disorderly growth. That 17th century speak for, shave, gentlemen. You trace the words with your fingertip. The language is vague enough to allow deniability but clear enough that any bishop reading it knew what was expected. Urban VIII wasn't making it law with fire and brimstone, he was using tone. Papal shade, if you will. Historians still argue whether this directive was truly intended as law or merely strong encouragement. Some say it was about bringing unity to the visual presentation of the Church. Others believe it was part of a broader effort to distinguish Catholic clergy from their Orthodox and Protestant counterparts, many of whom embraced beards like badges of doctrinal identity. One curious letter, stored just a few folios down, catches your eye. It's from a French bishop writing back to Rome. He explains that while he's happy to comply with the new guidelines, many of his priests live in remote alpine villages where razors are rare, water freezes before dawn, and local barbers double as blacksmiths. Enforcement, he writes delicately, may result in chapped chins and rebellion. You chuckle. Enforcement was never going to be uniform. And the Church, despite its reputation, has always had to balance divine ideals with muddy roads and human nature. You leave the archives feeling oddly comforted. Even the most powerful institutions can get caught up in the small stuff. And in the 1600s, few things were smaller, or more symbolically fraught, than facial hair. Walking back through the cathedral nave, you notice the frescoes. Every face is smooth. The apostles look like they've been freshly sheared by divine stylists. One cherub even appears to be holding a tiny comb. It's all very subtle. But now that you're looking, you see it everywhere, the absence. Beardlessness as virtue. Outside again, the sun is softer now. Late afternoon. You pause beside a fountain, the water burbling as pigeons argue about crumbs. A group of seminarians passes, their black robes fluttering lightly, their faces clean-shaven to a point that makes you wonder if they wax. One of them glances at you, friendly, curious. "Pilgrim?" he asks, you smile and nod. "Research," you reply. He grins. "Be careful. History's deeper than it looks." Then he's gone, swallowed into the city's fold. You wander now without direction. The story is starting to settle into you, like sediment in a slow-moving stream. Urban VIII. The ban. The clergy's reluctant razors. The debates over grooming as gospel. But there's something more here. Something quieter. You think back to the portraits of Urban himself. Always the same look, stern eyes, tight mouth, marble-like skin. And of course, clean cheeks. Not even a hint of fuzz. He wasn't just enforcing the rule, he embodied it. He was the brand. There's a theory, one of those fringe ones, of course, that suggests Urban's beard ban wasn't just theological. It was political. By discouraging beards, he distanced himself from certain noble houses known for their lush facial hair. In Rome, even fashion has factions. One cardinal with a famously luxurious beard was reportedly removed from favor around the same time the edict was penned. Coincidence? Or close shave? Historians, naturally, disagree. You stop at a quiet trattoria, order a small espresso and a biscotti, and let the breeze play with your napkin. Across the street, an old statue leans into ivy. It's Saint Ignatius, or what's left of him. His beard has been weathered into a soft blur, like fog on marble. It's strangely peaceful. You finish your espresso and realize, for all the noise around this decree, the beard ban never really stuck forever. Urban's successors gradually relaxed it. The barbers lost their ecclesiastical edge. Eventually, facial hair crept back into the clergy like ivy. The espresso lingers on your tongue as you rise and begin walking again, no destination in mind, just the vague intention of letting the story take you wherever it pleases. You pass shops closing their shutters, stray cats stretching on warm cobblestones, and a man with a violin who seems determined to coax tears out of the evening air. As the music fades, you find yourself in a quieter quarter of Rome, where the streets grow narrow and the buildings lean in, gossiping over your head in chipped stucco and creeping vines. Here, nestled into a crooked corner, is a small museum, one of those places too obscure to have a ticket booth. The door is slightly ajar. Naturally, you go in. It's more of a curated attic than a museum, really. Shelves sag with relics, bishop's rings, quill knives, a child's illuminated primer from 1610. The lighting is soft and yellow, as if the bulbs are shy. There's no one at the front desk, so you drift in deeper, and then you see it, a display marked vestments and vanity, clerical style through the ages. Well, how could you not? On one pedestal rests a black beretta, its corner flaps dusted and forlorn. Next to it, a small placard explains that this was the favorite headwear of the Urban clergy in the 17th century, precisely the men affected by Urban VIII's tidy little decree. Another case features shaving tools, an ornate silver razor. A bowl once used for holy water now converted to lathering foam. Economical. What really catches your eye, though, is a pamphlet under glass. The title reads, "On the Moral Implications of Whiskers," and you genuinely can't tell if it's satire or not. The text, faded but still legible, warns that facial hair may confuse the faithful as to the sanctity of the pulpit and suggests that unshorn faces might be an unconscious mimicry of the heretic and the wild. You smile. There it is again, the fear that too much fuzz leads to theological fuzziness. Historians still debate whether this pamphlet was a grassroots initiative from devout lay people, a bit of papal propaganda, or something someone wrote for fun that accidentally went viral in 1632. There's another object nearby, a mirror framed in gilt, with a sign that reads, "Used in seminary classrooms to discourage vanity." The idea was simple: students would shave in front of it but cover it during prayer. One side for reflection, the other for submission. That pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? As you drift further into the museum's shadows, you spot something unexpected: caricatures. Yes, from the 17th century. Little woodblock prints mocking the clean-shaven clergy. One depicts a bishop slipping on a bar of soap and landing chin first into his own sermon notes. Another shows two cardinals staring at each other's smooth faces with visible suspicion, their beardless chins rendered bulbous and faintly ridiculous. You chuckle softly. Even back then, someone was always ready with a quill and a petty joke. There's one final display at the end of the room, tucked behind a curtain of dust motes. It shows a timeline, the evolution of beards in Catholic clergy from the early Church through the Renaissance, the Baroque era, and beyond. Dotted along the line are portraits, each more elaborately robed than the last. You notice something funny. The further you go past Urban VIII's rule, the fuzzier the portraits become again. Slowly at first, sideburns here. A tasteful mustache there. But by the mid-18th century, a few brave souls are sporting full, if modest, beards once more. Not flamboyant, mind you. Just persistent. A note at the bottom explains that no formal reversal of Urban VIII's facial hair discouragement was ever issued. The Church simply stopped enforcing it. Like many rules, it faded into cultural compost, still technically there, but only in the way that some furniture in old houses is technically a family heirloom. Nobody knows what to do with it. So they leave it alone. You step outside again. The street feels cooler now. Rome, like the Church, has softened its edges since Urban's day. And though his beard decree made waves for a time, the tides of style always win eventually. Still, you can't help but wonder, what was it about beards that unnerved him so? Was it the lack of conformity? The way they added an unpredictable shadow to otherwise uniform faces? Or maybe it was the fear that, behind all that hair, a man might think he had a bit too much power of his own. After all, a beard can't be excommunicated, but it can certainly make a bishop look just a little too proud. You walk past an old stone wall where ivy creeps like ancient handwriting. A dog barks once, then lies down again. The city exhales. There's a subtle humor to it all. That a man with papal power, who governed during wars, scientific upheaval, and theological storm, found time, real time, to worry about sideburns. That he drafted elegant Latin urging clergy to consider their visible vessels. That entire councils met, not just to argue about dogma, but to pass judgment on whiskers. And yet, that's the charm of history, isn't it? The serious dressed in the ridiculous. The sacred delivered with a straight razor. Urban VIII left behind many legacies: architecture, poetry, patronage of science, and a curious bump in the road of ecclesiastical grooming. His beard ban wasn't the most important thing he did, not by far. But it was the most human, and because of that, it lingers. In museum corners. In whispered jokes among monks. In the steady return of the stubborn beard, you find another bench, this one beside a fountain shaped like a lion yawning eternally. You sit. The water sounds like sleep on its way. You think, not for the first time, that the real story of Urban VIII's beard ban isn't about hair at all, it's about the Church's face. And who gets to shape it? You lean back on the stone bench and stare up at a slice of the dusky Roman sky, caught between laundry lines and ancient cornices. Somewhere behind you, a moped sputters by, and you realize with a sleepy smile that even the noisiest parts of this city eventually settle. Just like the beard debate, but tonight, let's shift the frame a bit. You've seen the papal side of things, the shiny marble and embroidered collars. Now it's time to visit those who had to live with the consequences, specifically, the rank-and-file clergy of the 17th century. The ones who weren't strolling through Vatican corridors but traipsing through muddy fields, dodging roosters, and blessing bread ovens in exchange for eggs. You picture a small village in the hills outside Perugia. The year? Let's say 1634. A breeze carries the smell of hay and sheep. And in a crumbling stone rectory with a leaky roof, a local parish priest named Father Matteo is waking up to the sound of an insistent goat. He's not a particularly devout man, not in the way Rome might prefer, but he does his job. Baptizes babies, leads mass, pretends to understand Latin. And yes, he has a beard. Not by rebellion, mind you. Just practicality. It's cold in the Umbrian hills, and razors cost more than wine. Then, one day, a letter arrives from the diocese. It's sealed in wax and smells faintly of bureaucracy. Matteo cracks it open and sighs. You can imagine him rubbing his temples as he reads the delicate but unmistakable message, time to shave. The Holy Father prefers uniformity of appearance. Which, Matteo notes silently, probably doesn't apply to shoes, since he's been wearing the same mismatched pair since 1629. Historians still debate how widespread this kind of directive actually was. Did bishops genuinely enforce it in the countryside? Or was it more of a papal wish that never made it past the palazzo walls? Some surviving parish ledgers note the purchase of communal razors. Others mention nothing at all. One record from a coastal village simply says, "No change to the face of things." Either a pun or a refusal, still, the edict spread. And for many priests, it meant adapting. In some places, shaving became a group activity, a sort of clerical barbershop moment, complete with gossip, hymn humming, and the occasional nicked earlobe. In others, it bred quiet resistance. Beards trimmed shorter, but not gone. Or grown back slowly, like ivy after pruning, and then there were the sermons. Some priests embraced the moment as a metaphor, shaving as symbolic purification. Others made jokes from the pulpit. One Bavarian friar reportedly opened his homily with, "As you can see, brothers and sisters, I have sacrificed my winter insulation in the name of Rome." Laughter echoed through the pews. There's even a delightful tale, possibly apocryphal, of a Czech priest who shaved only half his face and claimed he was halfway to sanctity. According to legend, the bishop did not find this funny. But the villagers did. And they paid his chicken tax for the rest of the year. You pass a bakery now, the smell of warm bread drifting out into the street like a prayer. Inside, a grandmother leans over a counter, slicing crusty loaves and offering unsolicited advice. Her husband, seated nearby, strokes a beard so grand it could shelter sparrows. You imagine what Urban VIII might say if he saw it. Likely something in Latin. Likely disapproving. This all brings you to a question: why did facial hair matter so much to religious institutions? After all, Jesus is often depicted with a beard. So are the apostles, saints, monks, prophets. The original holy influencers were hardly clean-shaven. Yet, over time, as the church grew more hierarchical and centralized, image began to matter. Uniformity became a visual shorthand for unity. A clean face was easier to sculpt in marble. Easier to replicate in paintings. And let's not forget, the Renaissance ideal of beauty leaned toward smoothness. Beards, especially unruly ones, were harder to control. Of course, not everyone agreed. Eastern Orthodox clergy continued to favor beards. So did many Protestant reformers. Luther, Calvin, even Zwingli all rocked facial hair like spiritual rock stars. And here lies the rub. To Urban VIII, clean-shaven clergy may have visually reinforced Catholic distinctiveness. A kind of ecclesiastical branding. The Pope was Apple. Beards were Android. Historians still argue whether this visual divide had any theological weight. Some say it was purely aesthetic. Others suggest a deeper meaning, beards as a sign of humility, or conversely, of vanity. It all depended on who was judging and why. Meanwhile, poor Father Matteo, remember him, has finally decided to shave. He borrows a blade from the village blacksmith, heats water in a tin pot, and squints into a chipped piece of mirror. As the hair falls away, so does a little of his warmth, a little of his identity. But he finishes, dabs vinegar on the nicks, and steps outside to say Massachusetts. No one says anything about his new face. But afterward, a young boy tugs on his sleeve and asks if the saints made him do it. Matteo laughs. Just one, he says. And he lives in Rome. You smile at the thought. Even the smallest acts, like shaving, carry echoes of power, obedience, and quiet rebellion. History is built not just on wars and treaties, but on daily rituals like this. And whether Urban VIII knew it or not, his little grooming edict turned every clergyman's morning routine into a theological performance, and maybe that's the deeper point. Not control for its own sake, but a belief that small, visible signs can shape invisible truths. That's Shah. The moon is out now, washed pale and hanging like an old coin over the tiled rooftops of Rome. The lamps flicker yellow against stone walls, and your footsteps echo slightly, as if the city is trying to whisper back. You're moving through the old Jewish ghetto now, where history clings like fog to the shutters, and as you walk, the beard band echoes onward, not in marble or edict this time, but in stories passed down, in whispers of how daily life adapted to match the Vatican's vision of clerical decorum. Tonight, let's leave the priests for a moment and shift to the barbers, because if Urban VIII's decree affected anyone with quiet force, it was them, those steady-handed artists of the blade who suddenly found themselves essential to spiritual hygiene. In the 1600s, barbers were not just beard trimmers but surgeons, tooth pullers, and neighborhood confidants. With the beard ban in full swing, many of them became unlikely enforcers of papal fashion. Picture a small Roman barbershop in 1633. You duck beneath a crooked sign swinging on rusted hooks. Inside, the air smells of lye soap, clove oil, and boiled linen. A dog sleeps under the chair. A mirror leans at an apologetic angle. The barber, let's call him Luca, is rolling up his sleeves, humming a madrigal under his breath. He's got 3 appointments today, a deacon, a monk, and a very nervous seminarian. Business is good. Luca's razors, once dulled by sporadic use, are now honed daily. He's begun stocking scented pomades to soothe the irritation of repeated shaves. And in the drawer beneath the towels, a growing collection of theological pamphlets he's been given as tips. He doesn't really care about the politics. He cares about steady hands and repeat customers. But he's noticed, some clients smile at the mirror when the job is done. Others glance away like they've lost something. Historians still argue whether barbers like Luca were happy beneficiaries of the papal policy or unwilling participants in a broader control machine. Some records show increased profits during the early years of enforcement. Others note quiet protests, barbers who refused to shave clergy, citing conscience or fear of offending local customs. In Venice, there are stories of priests sneaking into Jewish or Greek neighborhoods for anonymous trims, hoping to avoid the parish gossip chain. In Palermo, one enterprising barber offered papal shaves with a free biscotto. Business boomed. Across the Alps, French barbers wrote irritated letters complaining that Italian trends were spreading like lice across the profession. One delightful document from 1635 lists the top 10 excuses given by clergy for not complying with shaving orders. Among them, sensitive skin, allergies to holy razors, and the ever-popular "my beard has a vow of silence." It's in this gray zone of compliance, this awkward dance between sacred and secular, that the real fun begins. Because rules, especially aesthetic ones, rarely land perfectly. People bend them, nudge them, work around them. Take, for example, the rise of the clerical shadow. This wasn't an official term, but one coined centuries later by amused historians. It refers to the deliberate cultivation of a near-invisible beard, short enough to satisfy the rule, long enough to hint at defiance. Kind of like rolling your school uniform skirt a notch higher while insisting its regulation length. The clerical shadow became especially popular among Jesuits, who prided themselves on both obedience and intellectual flair. They shaved, but always just a day late. They followed the law, but not the spirit. A quiet jab in the chin, if you will. You walk past a still-open cafe now. A couple sits under the awning, sipping espresso. The man has an impressively manicured beard. You wonder how long it took him to get it that sharp. Probably longer than it takes to sin, and that's the point. The act of shaving, which had once been mundane, was now a performance. A theological act disguised as grooming. In every barber's chair, questions lingered. Am I doing this because I believe in it? Or because Rome wants me to? Is smooth skin a virtue? Or just a sign I can't say no? The barber, too, became part therapist. He'd hear confessions more psychological than spiritual. Priests asking, does this make me look less like myself? Or, do you think Urban ever shaves his own face? One particularly bold friar allegedly asked, if God gave me this beard, who am I to tell him he was wrong? There's a note of dry humor in all this. The way politics and piety got tangled in sideburns. The way power can creep into barbershops with as much force as into basilicas. You think of Luca, carefully folding his towels, wondering if his work will be remembered. Spoiler. It won't. Not directly. But in the echoes? Always, back in the Vatican, Urban VIII likely never thought about these individual encounters. The late-night shave before Massachusetts. The boy who flinched at the cold steel. The old priest who stared too long at his unfamiliar face in the mirror. And maybe that's what makes this all so quietly powerful. That something as ordinary as a beard, its presence, its absence, could carry such weight. Could ripple out through families, villages, shops. Could make a barber into a kind of silent prophet with a towel over his arm and a sermon in every stroke. You stop for a moment, resting against a cool marble column. A cat brushes past your leg like a living punctuation mark. Maybe you've never noticed barbers in history books. But they were there, behind the curtains of empire, behind the collars of bishops, turning everyday gestures. The city's hum fades into the distance as you drift along cobblestone streets now touched by dawn's first light. You pause near a fountain, where pigeons preen themselves in the gentle spray, completely indifferent to the papal beard debate that has threaded its way through your thoughts tonight. Let's travel back in time a bit, beyond Rome, beyond priests and barbers, and look at the curious case of secular men caught in the beard ban's shadow. Because Urban VIII's decree didn't just wiggle its way into churches and barber shops, it rippled into the broader social fabric, touching nobles, soldiers, and even common citizens. Imagine you're a nobleman in Florence, 1635. You've spent a decade cultivating a luxuriant beard. One that would make even the Medici blink twice. It's the kind of beard that signals wisdom, status, and just enough rebelliousness to seem intriguing. Now, you hear the Pope's decree on clean-shaven clergy, and wonder if that means you too, since your cousin, the Cardinal, has recently taken to trimming his whiskers. The reality is a tangle of privilege and social signaling. While clergy were expected to comply strictly, the beard ban's influence seeped into fashion circles, stirring debates about masculinity and respectability. For some gentlemen, shaving was a painful concession to the church's growing power. For others, it was a chance to flaunt loyalty and align themselves visually with the new order. But here's the quirky bit: some men embraced partial compliance. You might have seen portraits from the era showing gentlemen with clean-shaven chins but thick mustaches, or the reverse. This odd mix, sometimes called the split beard, became a way of towing the line between fashion and personal flair. It's as if they were saying, I respect the Pope's wishes, but only halfway. Historians still argue whether this half-shaved style was an act of subtle defiance or sincere adherence. Some suggest it reflected regional tastes or even practical considerations, like beard irritation in warmer climates. Others believe it was a coded message, a way to communicate social allegiances without words. Then there's the military angle. Soldiers, especially those fighting in the 30 Years' War, faced their own grooming dilemmas. Practicality often trumped fashion here. Beards could harbor lice and made wearing helmets uncomfortable. Yet some units took pride in their facial hair, seeing it as a badge of honor and toughness. Interestingly, there's a recorded incident involving a French musketeer who refused to shave because he believed his beard protected him from bullets. While this sounds like an early version of Lucky Charms, it highlights how facial hair was entwined with identity and superstition. You stroll past a group of painters' studios now, where artists work on canvases that immortalize bearded and clean-shaven faces alike. Portraiture at the time was not just art, it was propaganda, personal branding, and social documentation. Every brushstroke was carefully considered to capture the sitter's status, beliefs, and sometimes even political loyalties. One fascinating detail: some painters subtly included barely noticeable beards or shadows on their subjects, hinting at a beard that wasn't actually there. A visual wink to those in the know. Or simply a smudge. Scholars debate this point, illustrating how even the arts got tangled up in the beard question. As you move deeper into the day, you find yourself in a bustling marketplace. Vendors shout their wares, the scent of fresh herbs mingling with roasting chestnuts. You notice an old man sitting quietly by a stall, stroking a beard that looks a century older than the rest of him. He smiles at you knowingly, as if to say, I remember when beards were the talk of the town. And maybe that's the heart of it all, how something as simple as facial hair becomes a prism reflecting power, culture, identity, and resistance. Urban VIII's ban was more than a grooming rule, it was a ripple that carried stories through generations. Through barbershops, battlefields, and art studios. You take a deep breath, feeling the gentle pulse of history in the cool morning air. The city awakens around you, full of quiet stories waiting to be told, and many more whiskers waiting to grow back. The morning light is soft now, casting long shadows across the piazzas where flower vendors are setting up their stalls. You find yourself wandering toward the outskirts of Rome, where the influence of the papal beard ban starts to mingle with the rhythms of everyday life. Far from the marble halls and sacred chambers, let's settle into the lives of ordinary folk, the artisans, farmers, and merchants who watch the papal decree with mild curiosity or confusion. For them, the beard was less a symbol of piety and more a part of daily routine and personal identity. Imagine you're a potter in a small Roman suburb. Your hands are stained with clay, your face warm from the kiln's heat. Your beard, long and unruly, has kept stray dust and ash off your chin for years. One morning, a messenger arrives with news: the Pope has declared beards unfashionable for clergy, and by extension, they are becoming a mark of disfavor. You scratch your jaw and wonder what it means for you, a simple craftsman who has no ties to the church hierarchy. Should you follow suit? Your neighbors whisper that barbers have never been busier, that even the city watchmen are tidying up their faces. Here's a quirky twist: some tradespeople actually began using the beard ban as a marketing gimmick. Barbers advertised papal shaves with proud signs, while tailors offered beardless suits as if your attire could somehow make up for your lack of whiskers. Markets buzzed with gossip about who had shaved and who held on to their beards like precious relics. Historians still argue whether these trends spread from top-down papal influence or emerged organically as a form of social mimicry. Either way, it's clear the ban trickled down in unexpected ways, shaping fashion and personal habits far beyond Rome's spiritual core. In the countryside beyond the city walls, the beard ban's reach was even murkier. Rural men were notoriously slow to change, tied to tradition and the seasons more than decrees from distant popes. Some simply ignored the rule, seeing it as an urban fad with little bearing on their daily lives. One delightful anecdote tells of a shepherd who refused to shave his beard, claiming it kept away wolves, though whether this was practical wisdom or a gentle excuse is lost to history. His neighbors teased him endlessly, calling his beard the wolf shield. You pass a baker's stall, the aroma of fresh bread mingling with the morning air. The baker himself has a trim beard that's just starting to gray at the edges. And he laughs when asked if he plans to shave. Only if the Pope sends me a letter, he jokes. This light-hearted defiance was common. For many, beards were comfort and habit, markers of masculinity or age, rather than symbols to be regulated. The practicalities of shaving with razors that were less than friendly made the ban a nuisance at best, yet, the ban also sparked innovations. Barbers developed new soothing balms and oils to ease the irritation caused by frequent shaving. Some recipes, rumored to include ingredients like rosewater and almond oil, became the secret pride of Roman barbershops. As you stroll past a quiet fountain, you think about how small moments, like the scent of a pomade or the scratch of a razor, connect you to centuries of human experience. The beard ban wasn't just about appearances, it was about control, identity, and the ways people respond to change, and just maybe, those little acts of grooming were moments of rebellion or submission, love or indifference, tiny stories woven into the grand tapestry of history. The afternoon sun slants warmly through leafy branches as you find a quiet bench in a small Roman garden. Birds chirp softly, and a gentle breeze carries the scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass. It's the perfect setting to explore how the beard ban trickled into the world of letters, art, and gossip, those invisible threads that shape public opinion and personal identity alike. Let's begin with the writers and poets, who had a knack for capturing the era's subtleties in their prose and verse. You might imagine a cloistered scholar, quill in hand, debating whether to shave for his next audience with a cardinal, or whether to grow a beard that quietly signals his resistance to papal fashion. Some scribes mocked the decree in veiled language. Poems circulated describing beards as the cloak of wisdom and the silent testament to freedom. One particularly cheeky sonnet called Shaving the Dulling of a Man's Soul, though its author, a known skeptic, had to publish it under a pseudonym for fear of papal censure. Historians still argue how much influence these literary jabs had on public sentiment, but they clearly show that beards had become more than facial hair. They were symbols ripe for satire, sympathy, or protest. Meanwhile, painters played their part in the ongoing beard saga. As you recall from earlier, portraits subtly hinted at beard lengths and styles, sometimes exaggerating them to convey status or personality. But beyond aesthetics, the band sparked a fascinating artistic trend, the beardless saint. These paintings depicted holy men with smooth chins, emphasizing purity and obedience, aligning with Urban VIII's vision. Yet paradoxically, some artists added faint shadows of whiskers, almost like a ghost of the beard that once was, perhaps acknowledging the tension beneath the surface. You pause and think about the gossip that must have swirled in Roman salons and taverns. Word traveled fast, some clergy shaved in secret, while others proudly displayed their bare faces, sparking murmurs about loyalty and piety. The beard ban wasn't just a papal policy, it became a social game, a kind of unspoken test among friends and rivals. Interestingly, rumors suggest that Urban VIII himself was vain about his own appearance. Some contemporaries noted he took great care with his grooming, though it's unclear if he adhered strictly to his own beard ban. This little contradiction, powerful man issuing a rule while perhaps bending it personally, adds a layer of human complexity to the story. You take a sip of water and watch a young boy chase a butterfly nearby. It strikes you how the smallest details, a trimmed beard, a whispered poem, a furtive glance, can ripple through history, shaping narratives and identities in subtle ways. As the afternoon light softens, you reflect on how the ban on beards was never just about shaving. It was about control and expression, conformity and quiet rebellion. Whether in poetry, paint, or whispered rumors, the story of beards and the men who wore, or removed, them is rich with texture and nuance, and through it all, the city carries on, its stones absorbing centuries of secrets, its streets echoing with laughter and sighs, its fountains reflecting not just faces, but the shifting tides of human nature. The sun dips lower now, painting the sky with soft hues of orange and rose. You find yourself wandering through a quiet piazza, where the murmur of conversation is gentle and the day's hustle gives way to an evening calm. It's a good time to explore the curious effect the beard ban had on women, and yes, even though it sounds like a man's issue, women had their own fascinating relationship with this whiskered saga. Picture yourself as a Roman woman in the 17th century. Your husband, or maybe your brother, has just returned home freshly shaven, looking strangely unfamiliar without his usual beard. You might find yourself wondering if this change makes him look younger, or if it somehow makes him seem less authoritative at the dinner table. Women of the era often had strong opinions on men's grooming. For some, beards were a sign of virility and wisdom; for others, they were simply a nuisance, catching crumbs at supper or getting in the way during tender moments. Urban VIII's decree stirred all these feelings and more. There's an intriguing and lightly humorous tradition recorded in letters and diaries from the period. Women sometimes kept small, fake beards made from fine horsehair or woven threads, which they tucked away as tokens or jokes. A few even gifted these tiny beards to their beloveds as playful reminders of what had been lost to the papal scissors. Historians still debate whether this was widespread or just the whimsy of a few spirited souls. But the idea of women engaging with the beard ban in such a tactile, imaginative way gives us a charming glimpse into private life. The ban also influenced beauty standards for women in subtle ways. With men's faces becoming smoother, facial hair on women, though rare, became a point of whispered curiosity. Some women with fine facial fuzz found themselves caught in conflicting social messages: should they remove it to conform, or keep it as a rare sign of uniqueness? Night settles gently over the city, wrapping rooftops and alleys in a quiet hush. The faint flicker of candlelight spills from windows, and you feel the rhythm of daily life slowing down, as if even time itself is ready to soften into rest. It's here, in these quiet moments, that you can ponder how the beard ban intersected with religion and ritual, shaping the very fabric of spiritual life in unexpected ways. Imagine stepping inside a dimly lit chapel, the scent of incense curling through the air like a gentle fog. Priests prepare for evening prayers, their faces freshly shaved in obedience to Urban VIII's decree. The absence of beards, once a common sight among clergy, now brings a stark, clean-shaven solemnity to the scene. For many, shaving was more than a cosmetic change, it was a visible sign of obedience and humility before God. Some priests found the ritual of shaving meditative, a quiet moment of care that prepared them for their sacred duties. Others felt it stripped away a part of their identity, a beard having been a lifelong companion through years of devotion. There's a particularly curious detail: some religious orders interpreted the ban differently. While Roman clergy followed it strictly, certain monastic communities outside Italy resisted or ignored the rule, considering beards a sign of spiritual maturity and wisdom. The Eastern Orthodox tradition, for instance, generally embraced beards as sacred symbols, creating an interesting divide within Christian practice. Historians still argue how much this papal ban influenced wider Christian norms or was seen as a strictly local Roman mandate. The complexities remind us that religion and culture are rarely simple or uniform. More often, they're a patchwork of beliefs, practices, and negotiations. You notice how the beard ban also affected rituals around ordination and confession. Freshly shaved faces became a requirement for new priests, a physical symbol of rebirth and purity. Some confessions reportedly included questions about compliance with the ban, highlighting how deeply it penetrated daily spiritual life. There are even whispered stories of barbers working late into the night in monastery courtyards, delicately shaving the beards of monks reluctant to part with them but obedient nonetheless. The soft scrape of the razor, the smell of soap, the quiet prayers whispered, these moments were small acts of transformation, both physical and spiritual. As you step back into the cool night air, the weight of these rituals settles gently around you. The beard ban was never just about hair, it was a marker of faith, identity, and the delicate balance between tradition and authority. You feel yourself growing heavy with the peaceful calm of the evening, the layered stories folding into the quiet night. The city sleeps, and with it, the echoes of bearded and bare-chinned men alike. You walk slowly now, beneath a sky dusted with stars. The streets have emptied, and even the fountains burble more softly, as though they too are winding down. It's the perfect hour to reflect on how the beard ban, odd as it may seem, was never just about Rome. Its influence wandered beyond Italy's borders, seeping into courtly whispers in Paris, rippling through the streets of Madrid, and even nudging the bearded pride of Moscow. Let's start with France. The court of Louis XIII was already quite fashion-conscious, and Urban VIII's decree arrived like the latest dispatch from a stylish neighbor. French courtiers, always eager to be au courant, began questioning their own whiskers. Though no royal edict followed immediately, shaving became ever more popular among the nobility, associated with papal elegance and clean-faced sophistication. There's an amusing note here: some Parisian gentlemen took to shaving only half their beards in protest, wearing them lopsided to spark conversation at salons. One diarist described it as a beard in retreat, while another insisted it made men look like fleeing hedgehogs. Fashion, it turns out, can be quite cheeky. Across the Pyrenees in Spain, the reception was mixed. The Spanish Habsburgs were more traditional, favoring thick facial hair as a mark of gravitas and strength. The beard ban reached them like an awkward cousin at a family dinner, one to be tolerated. Perhaps, but certainly not emulated. Still, some younger nobles were swayed. Spanish poets wrote verses praising the kissable chin, and barbers in Seville advertised papal trims, trying to cash in on the Roman trend. Historians still debate whether these were genuine shifts in taste or simply fads flitting through fashionable circles before being whisked away like powdered wigs. Then, there's Russia, firmly in the bearded camp. When news of Urban's decree reached the Orthodox clergy, the response was, well, not exactly enthusiastic. In the East, beards were a symbol of divine masculinity and patriarchal wisdom. The very idea of shaving felt sacrilegious. One Russian monk reportedly wrote that a man without a beard is as a bird without feathers, pitiful and unnatural. While it's unclear whether this was in direct reaction to Urban's policy, it certainly captures the sentiment of the time. You imagine a wide-eyed messenger from Rome, perhaps still dusty from travel, delivering the papal news to a frosty reception and a table full of heavily bearded skeptics. This wasn't the last time beard-related conflict would ripple across borders. Decades later, Peter the Great would famously impose his own beard tax, requiring Russian men to shave or pay up. Some scholars see this as part of the same continental struggle between tradition and modernity, between East and West, and, strangely enough, between razors and stubble. As you drift through these international echoes, you realize how something as small and mundane as a beard can hold layers of meaning, national identity, spiritual symbolism, fashion, even rebellion. It's a reminder that history isn't always about grand battles or sweeping reforms. Sometimes, it's about chin hair. You pass beneath an old archway, where a statue's clean-shaven face seems to smile knowingly at you. Beneath the stone, whispers of past centuries settle like dust, waiting for another curious listener to come along, and now, in this moment of quiet reflection, you carry with you the soft ripple of a decree that, for all its odd specificity, managed to stir conversations from cloisters to palaces, from Rome to realms beyond. You're almost home now. The streets are hushed, the stones beneath your feet still warm from the day. Somewhere nearby, a cat slips along a windowsill, and the distant clang of a church bell marks the passage of time, slow, eternal, echoing across centuries. Before we drift into sleep, let's consider what happened after the beard ban faded, and how this peculiar chapter of history closed its final pages. Urban VIII's reign eventually ended, and with his passing, so too did the force of his more idiosyncratic policies. Later popes either ignored or quietly rolled back the beard rule, perhaps finding it more trouble than it was worth, or maybe they just missed their beards. There was no grand announcement. No triumphant return of facial hair. It simply grew back. Over time, beards returned to the Vatican, creeping down chins like ivy reclaiming a stone wall. A few popes even sported facial hair proudly, although it never regained its medieval prominence. Clergy and laymen alike found their own balance between style, custom, and comfort. In barbershops across Rome, razors once again became optional, but the legacy of the beard ban lingered in curious ways. Portraits from Urban's era remain as frozen whispers of the time, smooth faces staring solemnly from ornate frames, a whole generation of upper lips and chins exposed for posterity. The style even left a temporary imprint on Renaissance sculpture and coins. Where beardless faces symbolized a refined obedience to the divine, historians still argue whether Urban's ban was ever truly about religion, or whether it masked other insecurities, about power, image, or aging. Some say he simply disliked the shaggy aesthetic, others suspect he wanted to create a uniform, disciplined clergy that mirrored the centralized strength of his papacy. You find yourself back in the quiet garden where your journey began. The trees sway gently in the evening breeze, their leaves whispering like old men trading stories. You sit once more on the stone bench, feeling the warmth fade from the air. Looking back, the beard ban was never just a quirky papal footnote. It was a mirror, reflecting how personal choices ripple outward, touching politics, art, gender, and identity. It showed how even the most peculiar decrees can reveal the deeper workings of power and the profoundly human responses that follow, from barbers sharpening their razors with extra flair, to women keeping tiny, handmade beards as tokens, to poets lamenting the loss of whiskered wisdom. This was a moment when something small became something strange. And then something strangely meaningful. You think again of the whispered prayers, the scraping blades, the paintings and poems. You remember the monks, the saints, the rebels in the salons of Paris. All of it flowing together like a gentle stream beneath the surface of time. So much of history is loud and bold, but sometimes, it's the quiet details, the tender absurdities, that stay with us longest. A gentle stream beneath the surface of time. So much of history is loud and bold, but sometimes, it's the quiet details, the tender absurdities, that stay with us longest.